Hello, everyone. I'm going to explain to you how to um, implement access control in Swift. Um, actually, access control in databases has been implemented in a few DBMS, for example, Oracle. Oracle uh, to rewrite queries so that a rewritten query can um, handle the authorizations, which means depending upon the user and user role will be determined. Although it is not uh, originally stated that way, but depending upon who issue the query, there will be a different that we can think in Swift is the graphical user interface based access control. So depending upon user's login and password or user role, we can enable or disable the user interface. All right. For example, button can be clickable or button may be disabled depending upon the credential of a user. So one tip that you need to do is that if that is a button, say button DBA, um, then the DBA is implemented in this way, right? But actually don't need to have both of these, right? Right. So button can be um, when button um, is um, wait a minute. Okay. Um, right. Button DBA is a user uh, interface, right? It should be. It is a function. That function can be enabled or disabled. So if that uh, user interface is defined in both IB action and IB outlet, um, then when the button login is implemented, we can say depending upon some if statements, we can uh, make it enabled or disabled. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you uh, a demo first and then explain uh, the specific code. All right. So that is this. All right. Let me first. So what happens here is that I have user name and ID and password and login. If ID and password is not, oh, and also here we have three buttons. This admin buttons is enabled only if uh, any name is, I would say name, but there will be a role. It could be a role. If user a specific user role is in the admin list, then it'll be enabled. Otherwise, disabled. And this calc button is always open to the public. Exploit. This is for database exploit. Um, if ID and password is matched, then data can be exploited. But here there's two cases. If ID and password is matched and that guy is also in the admin list, then that guy can access all the data. What it means is that if somebody is not in database but ID and password matched, then that specific guy can see only the data that is associated with that himself or herself. All right. Of course, if somebody try to log in any arbitraries so that ID and password is not matched, then none of this is enabled. Only that guy can do calculations that you already looked at, right? So let's try to see how it works. All right. So let's say John, and here arbitrary anything. Oh, this should be number, right? So 111 and this whatever that is, and login. Then John, this is John, right? So he can do some admin work, right? But he cannot do exploit because doesn't have ID and password matched. So if we have ID and password associated with the John, login, still that guy can do admin job, which means he can create, he can enter, for example, here, Mercy, let's say cyber, and 1212, and cyber 1212, save. That is saved, right? Back, and he can do exploits. So here's a 12312. This is a super user. As I said, John is in the super user, so that he can access. If I don't put any condition, then we can see all the data, right? Let's see. And then if we see anything starts with J, then we can see only something with the J's, right? Back, and if it is not John, but let's see, John and 8899, and login, then it's not John, but John. So admin is not possible. If I click this, it's not going to work. But exploit is possible. 8899 is a regular user. So for example, if I want to see, I want to see all, but click. I cannot see all, only for John, right? Because that is that guy. So that type of thing is an access control. Depending upon the access control, different authorization is implemented. All right. So let me explain to you a specific code how you worked. If you see here on this, so for example, yeah, button login, then we can say button DBA access is enabled or disabled, right? That is done, and then that is passed over to the next view controller. So here, this starts from here, it goes to this. This is view controller, right? The view controller here is called the search name view. So if we see search name view, then search name view has user ID and user role that is written here, right? So how can that be passed from view controller? Here is a prepare function, and we define a segue destination as a search name view. If it is the case, then this is a variable, right? This is a variable for segue, not the segue variable, but this is some of the destination variable. That destination has a user ID. User ID is not local variable, but user ID is the variable at the destination. Remember, the user ID is defined here, search name, then here user ID is a string, user role is a string. So we can come back here. So user ID is the ID that we read. User role is that we read from here. That user entered a text field. We assign it to ID, and then username assigned to a name. Okay, so that is what we send to the destination, that ID and role. And another, so if ID is a verifier, ID and password are verified, then we say that button is enabled, otherwise disabled. And then username, name is not just a name, we can say that it's a role, okay? Although I put as an example John is a role, John's role. Or you could do, if you can define it super or DBA, whatever you want to say. So if that is contained in the admin, then admin is here, that is an array. If that array contains user entered the name, then we call it super, and we display the different user images. If it's a super, then John's image, otherwise simply center image, right? And then ID and password verifier, that is something that you have to define by yourself. So I defined here ID password, right? So ID and password receives, and then we select from the database given ID, right? And we extract a key if password is the returned key, that is this, then return boolean is true, otherwise boolean is false. So this ID verifier returns boolean function, which means true or false. Therefore, depending upon the cases, we return true or false, and therefore if that is true, which means given ID and password is matched from the database returned for a given ID, then we say they are verified. Therefore, button is enabled. Otherwise, it's disabled. All right. I think that is what they did. And another thing that I want to say here, when you deploy this app to real physical iPhone, then when user enter the text field, then you still have a virtual keyboard. So we want to control that virtual keyboard, which means I want to hide the virtual keyboard. Then you need to use this. And also up here, you have to have UI text field delegates. One more thing that you need to do is you have to do that hide the keyboard. You have to call that function hide keyboard. That is we already looked at, right? This should be called from the loading, the default function. And then this is also needs to be defined, these two things. All right, when this delegate is included, then don't forget that you have to have this text field should return. All right, I think this is it for you, and I think you will be able to do that. Okay, thanks so much.